So there is a lot to dissect here when it comes to the question of what will happen next between Russia and Ukraine. Two people who have been thinking an awful lot about that question, Janice Stein of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy here in Toronto, and Irvin Studin, the editor-in-chief of Global Brief magazine. Hello to the both of you. And Irvin, I'll start with you because, I think the million-dollar question has to do with what Putin is thinking at this point, right? So what do you think is the dominant motivation here for Russia?
Well, thanks, Andrew. Hi, Janice. I think one has to look at it from two dimensions. First, the internal picture within Russia, and second, the external picture from Russia's point of view. Internally, the major question that people underestimate is the succession question. Who's after Putin? And that is always on his mind. It's always been on his mind, but it's acutely so now. So we might imagine what's happening now is a fin de règne, end of reign type of biblical action, historical. He's making his last hurrah. He needs to consolidate the center, Moscow. It's a young state for the successor. The external picture is, to be direct, unfinished business from Moscow's perspective vis-a-vis the West, vis-a-vis Ukraine, and they're playing a chess game. We don't know yet what the moves are. I'm sure we'll talk about it.
Well, and Janice, we know one particular move, certainly the one that is most concerning the world, is the prospect of an invasion. Do we have an idea what that would look like in terms of Russia's capabilities, but also Ukraine's ability to defend itself?
We do, Andrew, and I think it's fair to say that the invasion already happened when Russian tanks rolled over the border. So we're really talking, is he going to stop in these two independent republics? Is he going to take the whole of the Donbass? And would he go even further? Russia's army is immeasurably stronger than Ukraine's. There is not a real fight here. So he is not impeded in any meaningful way by Russia's army. What is likely, however, though, is that there will be fierce resistance. There could be serious Russian casualties. There will be large Ukrainian casualties. And then what Ukraine has organized and prepared for, what we would call resistance, repeated insurgent attacks.
And Irvin, what would be the consequences for Russia if all of that were to happen? And I'm thinking particularly from the perspective of the international community.
I think domestically within Russia, Russia would be further radicalized. What happened in 2014 after the Ukrainian revolutions, that you had three houses radicalized, we must imagine. Russia was radicalized, Ukraine was radicalized, and we were radicalized vis-a-vis Russia. Invasion of Ukraine would radicalize even Russia even further, would definitely radicalize Ukraine. It would radicalize the West a little less because we're a little confused coming out of the stupor of the pandemic. We've got China to deal with in our own domestic circumstances. But within Russia and Ukraine, two houses radicalized. Russia radicalized in the context of a Russian succession is very dangerous because we don't know what forces come to the fore post-Putin. Ukraine radicalized really means the disintegration of a very young, weak Ukrainian state, and we also don't know what that looks like. The danger, of course, is that the disintegration of Ukraine could bring about the disintegration of Russia, which is a centuries-long catastrophe, one that would infect all of Europe and us in the end, because we do share some borders with Russia as well.
Janice, at this point, do you see a middle ground, a way forward that would avoid the worst-case scenario that we've been talking about?
I was cautiously optimistic, Andrew, that a way would be found before Russian tanks rolled. There were options. Much harder now that the Russian tanks have rolled. You saw the fury on Putin's face yesterday. He feels unheard, disrespected, angry. Russia has been humiliated. All of those emotions were just there. I think we're going to have to wait now. Unfortunately, the diplomatic process is probably stalled, tragically, until events on the ground take their course. And that is a terrible result for Ukraine. It is a very bad result for Russia. Russia will suffer as a result of this. And frankly, it's a very bad result for Europe as well.
If I could, I'd like to end with something of an impossible question, perhaps, for both of you. And Janice, you know, I take your point that one way of looking at things is that an invasion has already happened. But in your mind, will there be a full-scale invasion further to what we've already seen?
I don't think you bring up 150,000 troops in field hospitals and blood supplies and tow in the kind of artillery that we have seen move in over the last 24 hours. Sadly, I think he does.
And Irvin, on the inevitability or the likelihood of a larger scale invasion, where do you stand on that?
An invasion is very possible, if not probable. The Russians, like the Ukrainians, are chess players. The Russians have better assets. The Ukrainians still have intellect. We in the West don't have any moves to play. I'm for Asian intervention through diplomacy. Israel, India, Japan, South Korea, China, they have cards to play, and they still can make a heroic play to save the day.
Irvin Studin, Janice Stein, thank you so much for your time. This has been excellent.